Imagine a scene. The Empire State Building, set against a hazy, burnt orange background, thick with smoke.
Imagine hardly being able to see 2 blocks down from the iconic skyscraper. Imagine the sting in your eyes. Imagine the smell. We're not dreaming up the setting for a sci-fi disaster movie film. This is reality for millions of people across North America in the middle of 2023.
It's apocalyptic stuff. But this smoke isn't even from New York. It's drifted over from a series of immense and disastrous wildfires hundreds of miles away in Canada. And it's far from the first incident like it in the last few years.
The power of the fires was the highest that had ever been recorded.
Fire suppression caused a tinderbox in our region.
Sometimes the air can be so smoky that you can't go outside.
There's all these terrible words, hellscape. Basically, it was a hellscape.
As our planet heats, wildfire is becoming more and more frequent, and the impacts are reaching further than ever before. So, how do we learn to live with this new reality?
And how can we fight to protect our Earth from these risks?
From the Natural History Museum, this is Our Broken Planet, where we find out how we created some of the problems of our modern world and search for solutions from nature and science. I'm Tori Herridge.
And I'm Khalil Thurlaway. Across this series, we'll be exploring the interconnected issues facing our Earth and asking the question, what can we do about it?
And in this episode of Our Broken Planet, we're exploring something uncomfortably topical: wildfire.
Over the course of 2023, Canada has experienced immense and disastrous wildfires, beginning in March and increasing in intensity into the summer months. In early June, images of the hazy yellow atmosphere of New York City, hundreds of miles away from ground zero of the fires, blew up the internet.
It's been a horrible reality for those living in North America. The air is incredibly unhealthy to breathe and has forced people across the Northeast to take refuge inside. States of emergency have been declared, and the Canadian government has sought help from nations around the world to contain the blazes.
For a lot of people, this is one of the realities of climate change hitting home, striking right at the heart of a financial and cultural capital like New York, and grabbing the entire world's attention.
So in this episode of Our Broken Planet, we'll be exploring how wildfire is becoming more frequent across the globe, looking to Earth's history for a peek at our fiery future, and discussing some of the solutions that passionate activists are fighting for today.
Now, as we're recording in 2023, what's happening in Canada right now has some parallels with other wildfire events that we've seen over the past few years. Let's turn the clock back just a couple of years and take a look at Australia to hear about the Black Summer bushfires of 2019 and 2020.
There was this orange, browny kind of look. You couldn't see to the end of the street. It was kind of like fog, but a terrible smelling fog that also had this sort of orange glow to it.
That's Professor Nerilie Abram, a climate scientist at the Australian National University in Canberra, recounting the view out of her window in early 2020.
2019 was a remarkable year in Australia. It was our hottest year on record. It was our driest year on record. It also came at the end of a 3-year period that was very dry. And even if you look further back, the 20-year period that had been very, very dry. And so when the summer came around, and even before the summer came around, our forests were just incredibly dry and ready to burn. One of the remarkable things about this event was that it wasn't a couple of fires here or there, or one big fire. It was fires all along the coast of southeast Australia. In total, across that 6-month period, the spring and the summer of 2019 to 2020, it was almost a quarter of the forested area in southeast Australia was burnt.
The Black Summer bushfires burnt through nearly 60 million acres of land. To put that into some perspective for you, that's roughly the size of the entire UK. Huge.
The estimates have been 1 billion animals killed. It has pushed many of the species of the animals and also the flora closer towards being threatened and possible extinction. In terms of the human costs, there were 33 lives directly lost as a result of the fires. But more than that, there were many hundreds of people who lost their lives because of the smoke pollution, and thousands of hospitalizations because of that. So the impacts on people were enormous.
But of course, this is far from the first time we've heard about Australia burning. It's a continent kind of synonymous with fire, a place known as a fire-adapted landscape.
Fire is actually an important element of many, many ecosystems.
Dr. Sandy Knapp is a researcher in the Plants Division at the Natural History Museum.
Those Mediterranean ecosystems, which are classic fire-adapted ecosystems, places like southern Australia, South Africa, California, those kinds of areas which you have hot, dry summers and cool, wet winters, those are very fire-adapted types of vegetation. Many of these plants in these fire-prone ecosystems have essential oils, very oily kind of leaves, which are very flammable. So they'll have these flammable leaves, like eucalyptus, for example. Eucalyptus has a lot of oils in the leaf, and they're very, very highly flammable.
And what's the evolutionary advantage to having these flammable oils in their leaves?
Well, to a certain extent, it means that they catch fire easily and the fire moves on. So one of the things, in the absence of there being these hot wildfires, you would get these flammable plants that would catch fire, and then the fire would move on when it had consumed them. So it would make things move quickly. Australia is incredibly diverse. The eastern part of Australia, around Sydney, where we had those really big fires a few years ago, is mostly eucalyptus woodland. You get to the western part of Australia, near Perth, in that other corner of Australia, a lot of that is Banksia woodland, which is also fire adapted. And this is where you get the things that are serotinous, that the cones burst open and release the seeds when a fire goes through, or that things will sprout up from the base. And that's also where you get this amazing, what I call a geophyte flora, which is these kind of lily family, gladiolus, amaryllidaceae, beautiful bulbs that come up and have a real display after a fire, because they just hang out there in the ground just waiting for all that lovely nutrition to come after a fire, because that ash which comes after a fire is incredibly high in lots of nutrients which plants need to grow.
So Australia is used to wildfires, as are the native plants and animals. But there was something different about the Black Summer bushfires.
Australia, it's fire prone. We've had fires in the past, but these fires were off the record, both in terms of the area that was burnt, just a phenomenal amount, much more than you would normally expect. The power of the fires, so how much material was being burnt. So for every month of that spring and summer period, the power of the fires was the highest that had ever been recorded. And also the number of fires that went from normal bushfires into these extreme fire events.
These fires stretched all the way along Australia's east coast. Like the scenes from New York, landmarks like the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House were bathed in an apocalyptic orange haze from the smoke. The capital, Canberra, experienced the same. But despite the shocking scenes outside the window, it didn't change the course of government climate policy.
There have been multiple times where I've looked at the events that we see happening and said, surely this is enough. I'd had those sorts of thoughts previously when we've seen the mass bleaching events of the Great Barrier Reef. Like, surely that is enough. Like, surely we value that enough in Australia. That's the catalyst for change. And I think that the Black Summer fires were a catalyst in terms of public opinion. At the time, we were faced with a conservative government who were very adamant that Australia was doing its bit and we weren't going to increase our ambition in terms of emission reductions. And we have since then sort of seen a change in government here. We have increased our ambition. It's still not enough of an ambition that it would limit warming to 1.5 degrees, but it's an advance on where we were prior to the Black Summer and the years that followed it.
Well, that's positive.
Broadly.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of change of government and change of heart, maybe within government.
Yeah, but I think Nerilie's hit on something that happens quite a lot in response to big, visible effects of climate change will maybe change a little bit, but it's never much. It's never enough. But also there was some pretty big kind of governmental blunders in terms of how the Australian government handled the Black Summer.
Yeah, so you've got, obviously there's like kind of strategic, basic policy blunders from a climate change point of view, but then there's also that the media aspect of that and the fact that they just really dealt badly with it. So at the time, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, as it was happening, as towns were burning and people were losing their homes and people were evacuating, there's apocalyptic scenes of people, sort of trapped on the roads up and down the coast of New South Wales. Turns out he was on holiday in Hawaii and didn't rush home, I don't think.
But that's not just a PR issue, that's a leadership issue. Like, the whole point of leaders is that at times when you need them, they are meant to, in theory, be someone who coordinates and visions the response to stuff like this.
Yeah, then you get the feeling sometimes that that's not the thing that concerns them, it's the PR that concerns them. So he comes home, Scott Morrison returns to Australia, and maybe rather than stepping up and doing the things people wanted him to do, he dealt with the PR issue by mounting a PR campaign, it seems. So he flies into New South Wales and people are furious though, because you can see it. You can see it when you're being like kind of used, maybe. I think you feel like you're being used in a PR situation. Mm-hmm. That's certainly the impression you get if you watch videos from the time. He turned up. I can remember this. He turned up. He went to shake the hands of one of the firefighters. I think the guy's like, no, actually, mate, I don't want to shake your hand. It was like proper awkward, because to refuse to shake someone's outstretched hand, it sounds like a small thing, but it is, to watch it, incredibly awkward.
And it's powerful because it's saying that I don't want to validate your mishandling of this thing. These people who've lost their homes and these firefighters who've been trying to get these blazes under control, they're the ones who've been putting themselves at risk or being put at risk by these policies. Honestly, exactly. Fair play to him.
Yeah, exactly. Fair play indeed. And then also, same PR tour, he goes and visits one of the towns that has been completely razed to the ground by the fire. And whilst he was there, he goes up to talk to a woman called Zoe Salucci McDermott, and she was like in her 20s, pregnant, and he goes to talk to her and offers his hand again to shake it. And she's like, I'm only shaking your hand if you give more money to the RFS, that's the Royal Fire Service, the Voluntary Fire Service. And what he did, he just grabbed her hand anyway and shook it and then walked away. It's just completely. It is the most insane video.
For those of you listening at home or wherever you are, my jaw was hanging open at that bit. I was riding on the back of that massive respect for this woman Zoe, and then the pits of disrespect to just grab her hand anyway.
Yeah, she went on social media afterwards, and she was like, "My house has burned to the ground." And rather than stepping up and going, I'm listening, what can I do? He said, my house has burned to the ground, and the Prime Minister turned his back on me, right?
I mean, obviously, it's terrible, the situation and the conditions that have led them here, but it's cool to see here that people who maybe feel powerless in the face of politicians who don't care about you, to be taking back a little bit of power through these small acts of defiance and protest, having those symbolic and powerful acts must have contributed to some of those discussions and changes that led to this change of government. And as Nerilie mentioned, she still thinks that they've got quite a way to go on meeting targets for reducing emissions.
Yeah, and of course wildfires aren't going to go away anytime soon. First and foremost, they're a natural phenomenon. They're happening on a landscape that's adapted to them. They've been around on our planet for a very long time.
Fire is an inevitability when you have photosynthesis and you have land-based plants, you have carbon, you have oxygen, you have lightning. Even without humans, you're going to have a combustible planet. And we know from geological history, fire's been around for a very, very long time, and plants and animals have been adapting to fire.
David Bowman is Professor of Pyrogeography and Fire Science at the University of Tasmania.
It's about 420 odd million years there's evidence of fire in the geological record. It's a big chunk of Earth's history, and we fire ecologists know that that's part of the deal. It's part of the life cycle of those plants and animals to have this periodic combustion. So
to think of that, just to reframe your idea of the Earth, it's a blue planet but also it's a red planet in its own way. It's a fiery planet.
Yeah.
So while our fiery planet has had 420 million years to adapt to wildfire, the 2019 Black Summer bushfires were different.
It was just this unfolding nightmare of fires, particularly concentrated on the east coast of New South Wales. Those extraordinarily dramatic, apocalyptic, genuinely apocalyptic scenes of tourists and communities standing with horses and dogs on a beach in a strangely orange atmosphere, like they just experienced a nuclear hit. And in fact, they had, in terms of energy intensity, that those fires really, now we know from the science, behaved as nuclear bombs or volcanic eruptions in terms of their energy. They were simply insanely intense. There's all these terrible words, hellscape. Basically, it was a hellscape.
Wow. Some very emotive language from David there.
Yeah. So many people, I think, living in Australia were horrified.
Traumatised.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But what's also interesting is, what he's saying about us living on a fiery planet.
Yeah.
Like, we live in a world with all the ingredients for fire, and fire is such a natural part of a lot of these systems and processes.
I think it is really important to remember that. Like, we're not going to get rid of fire. It's part of what our planet is, and really it's part of who we are as a species as well. I mean, there's that there too. I mean, that's kind of why we're in the problem that we're in to so many different degrees. It's like we burn a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we found a cool, interesting, useful thing, and it turned out to be too cool, too interesting, and too useful.
Yeah, exactly. We've done a very good job at of making fire part of our planet's story. But anyway, I mean, talking of stories, I'm going to completely stop this conversation and do a hard segue. Exactly. Handbrake turn. Going back into history, 1970s for a good news story.
I was unaware there was anything good in the 70s.
But there was a time when the world came together to solve a global problem, and that problem was the problem of CFCs.
Chlorofluorocarbons, for those that might not know. And these were gases that were used in fridges and spray cans. And in the 70s and 80s, it became apparent that these gases were depleting and forming what we called a hole in the ozone layer. So the ozone layer is a layer of oxygen-containing gas called ozone that hangs out up in the stratosphere about 10 to 15 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. And it acts like a shield, protecting us from some of the more harmful solar radiation, like UV rays, that cause cancer. And it's not technically a big hole, it's more of a kind of thinning at the north and south poles, but we call it a hole because it makes sense in our heads.
And then as a result, the world got together. Banned CFCs. In fact, before they even banned it officially, people voluntarily changed their behaviours.
So this is one of the rare stories of, scientists identifying an issue and people taking it seriously, changing their behaviour, and that resulting in system change, and that system change resulting in actual positive environmental change. Yeah. The ozone layer is, in some ways, repairing. Yeah,
it's basically, it's doing what they hoped would happen. That people came together, they changed regulations, and they fixed it. CFCs are gone. The ozone layer is coming back. It's getting better. It's great.
And this being the podcast it is, I can sense a but coming.
But, yeah, so coming back to fire, well, there are these things called pyrocumulonimbus clouds, or if you're a fire researcher, pyro-CBs. And these are massive cloud formations created by intense heat, like you get in wildfires, and they force particulate matter up into the stratosphere. An example, one of the first... No, it's bad. It's bad. One of the first examples that was recorded was after the Hiroshima bomb in 1945, just to give you some indication of the intensity of energy that's required to create them. And of course, if you're forcing particles up into the stratosphere where the ozone layer is, that is not good news.
Ruh-roh.
People should not know what a pyro-CB is, but many people do. A pyro-CB is basically a chimney from the surface of the Earth to the stratosphere. That is not a good thing to have. That means that the fires that are burning are blasting a hole through the atmosphere and ejecting extraordinarily weird chemical compounds into the stratosphere and black carbon, changing the actual meteorology of the stratosphere. And we've just learned in the last month something even more terrifying, and that is that a new form of chemistry has been postulated to explain the rapid destruction of the ozone hole above the 2019-20 fires. And the inescapable conclusion is that if these fire outbreaks that we're seeing and these fire chimneys, these pyrocene bees, become normal around the world in fire-prone environments, there's a very good chance we could actually do ourselves and the rest of the planet serious harm by stripping the ozone layer and actually realising that all of the worst fears that we had that drove, the control of the CFCs, that could all be down the toilet.
That is something that I was not aware of. So I thought the ozone layer was currently the good news story, the thing that we fixed. But you're saying there's new holes opening up over Australia where there were significant bushfires, and it seems to be directly linked to the presence of these pyrocumulonimbus clouds.
Correct.
Well, thank you for giving me nightmares.
But what I find intriguing about this story is that if we're going to have planetary effects, because there are many other planetary effects that went with the 2019-20 fires. There was also impact on the southern oceans with fallout that led to an enormous algal bloom because there was nutrient enrichment. And there was also 1.6 times the amount of anthropogenic carbon emissions from Australia was emitted by those fires. So we're talking about really, really big, difficult to exaggerate Earth system effects.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And to give listeners a bit of an idea of what a pyrocumulonimbus looks like, I'm looking here at a couple of pictures side by side, and there is the pyrocumulonimbus from the Hiroshima nuclear bombing in 1945, like an entirely person-made tragedy, and a pyrocumulonimbus formed from a wildfire. They're photos taken from planes very high up. You're above the clouds, you can see the landscape below you, tiny. And it's this huge pillar, column of like roiling grey and white smoke that goes straight up, and then almost like a kind of oyster mushroom, it hits a certain height and starts to spread out. And I guess that's those weird chemicals, as David Bowman was putting it, those byproducts from burning all that biomass, getting up into that high level of the atmosphere and spreading out.
Yes, really. I mean, the winds in the stratosphere are higher than the winds in like the troposphere where our weather happens, like lower down. So yeah, once you get up there, things can whiz around to long distances. And the clouds themselves, they are weird. I mean, they're like a thundercloud, right? That anvil-shaped cloud. But within them they're superheated, and so you might see rain, hail, lightning crackling through it, and then even tornadoes inside these pyrocumulonimbus clouds.
These are not just weird clouds. These dwarf all of the clouds around them.
Yeah, and you don't want to be seeing one of those on the horizon. And like David, like he's right. Like people shouldn't really even have to be aware of these clouds. They should be rare events. But suddenly, just in that bushfire season of 2019 to 2020, they were more of those pyrocene events than Australia had seen in the last 30 years.
Big, scary clouds.
Yeah. The scary cloud. They are big, they are scary, and it makes you think, okay, well, what can we do about it? And David Bowman says that the modern idea of containing fires, trying to stop them really, is well and truly out of date.
What's happening now because of climate change, the top-down approach to fire as being something that can be simply contained and concealed is breaking down. This amazing transformation. And that's why I like, the thought that soon we will be going back to tending the earthly garden with little fires, that we will be able not to do this sort of industrial scale burning, but we'll be able to get people back in amongst it and learn, as the Indigenous people learned, to use fire in a very considered and moderate way and in a safe way to create more biodiversity and more safe environments and more sustainable forests.
You can try to hold back this tide of fire, this natural tide of fire, but it'll eventually spill over. And that's a really evocative metaphor, I find. And it's pretty relevant to one of the other most devastating examples of wildfire in recent years. And those are the 2020 California wildfires. These fires burned through 10.2 million acres of land. 47 people died as a direct result, and 3,000 further excess deaths were caused by smoke inhalation. It was a complete disaster, and one that scientists agree was exacerbated by California's history of strict fire suppression policy. However, indigenous peoples in the land now known as California have for millennia practiced controlled burns, clearing and maintaining the land.
The colonizers basically thought that they were walking to a wonderful park-like setting and thought that that was something that nature created. Well, it was created with balance with the indigenous people.
Elizabeth Azzuz is the director of the Indigenous Burn Program for the Cultural Fire Management Council, an organization that strives to facilitate the practice of cultural burning on Yurok ancestral lands in Northern California.
So I have been burning since I was 4 years old. Not on purpose. My grandfather caught me playing with matches and decided to teach me my obligation to the earth. And so as a Yurok and Karuk tribal member, I have learned from my elders, my ancestors, how to manage and care for the land. So I was taught that fire is a tool. It's not a toy. It's definitely something we use to cleanse our environment, to restore our medicines, our basket materials, and our food sources. We get together and we say a prayer. We put up prayer in smoke.
Help us restore our food and our medicine. Help us restore this land. Help us to clean our mother so she can breathe. Give us your guidance as we use the most powerful tool you left us as your children.
Elizabeth and the Cultural Fire Management Council are facilitating prescribed burning across their ancestral lands. Prescribed or controlled burning is a practice where small fires are set to clear undergrowth, shape landscapes, and rejuvenate forests. How do your current fire management practices relate to the land management practices of your ancestors of millennia ago?
Oh my goodness. So when fire seclusion was put in place, we could be shot, killed basically for using fire. So it was taken from our hands as a people because the colonizers, as everyone seems to call them, basically did not believe that we knew how to work with fire and thought that we were trying to destroy everything. And so that was taken from our hands. And now that we're able to be back on the land, working with the land, we're training government agencies how to work with fire and how to work with the land. And it's really amazing to see CAL FIRE, a very large fire entity in this country, having commercials on TV now stating that, the way to go is prescribed burning.
Human beings today, we suppress fire, partly because we're building our houses in the wrong places. And so people feel they have to protect houses from fire.
Sandy Knapp from the Natural History Museum again.
So fires, if they happen on a regular basis and there's not a lot of what's called fuel loading, so like dead wood and kind of dead grass and stuff, then they burn slowly and they burn cool. It's difficult to think of a fire burning cool, isn't it, really? But what happens when we suppress fire is the fuel loading gets high, and then what happens is the fire burns very, very hot. And that can be absolutely devastating for particular plants.
So by attempting to suppress fire, we've actually unintentionally made it much more of a danger.
We have. And that, coupled with climate change, has meant that essentially the western part of the United States burns up every summer. And sometimes the air can be so smoky from fires in eastern Oregon and northern California that you can't go outside. The air quality is so terrible. And that's partly because these fires are burning very, very hot. And so they become wildfires.
Fire suppression has caused a tinderbox, basically, in our region of California. And it's not just our region that's suffering. All along California and pretty much the United States, There's a huge revitalization in prescribed burning with Indigenous communities. Cultural Fires involved with a group through the Nature Conservancy called the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network. We reach out to tribes all across the country. We teach them about how to get their rights back, how to work with government agencies. We do a lot of government-to-government meetings now where we're changing legislature and policy for prescribed burning. So there's so many things that, the tribes are coming together and working on that is making change in our world.
Elizabeth Azzuz and the Cultural Fire Management Council are part of a growing recognition of the value of Indigenous fire management practices, with a renewed understanding of the power of humanity's impact on our environments. Similar shifts in consciousness have taken flight across Australia and Africa. Here's Professor David Bowman again.
We've got landscapes that can burn in some of the most intense fires on Earth. How was it that Indigenous people were able to sustainably coexist with these systems? How is it that they were able to manage fire in a way that didn't lead to the very dramatic collapse and decline of Gondwanak vegetation that followed almost in the last 150 years? We've seen, massive retreat of these living fossil forests. What I'm really trying to get at is these big ideas and these big scales actually can come back to local scales and local relationships. A lot of the solutions to these problems are actually going to be found locally.
There is hope. Our collective actions have weight, as does the power that we have in inspiring the next generation. For a positive change, all you need is a spark.
My younger grandson is 4 years old, and all he can talk about is how he needs to restore the land and get rid of invasive species. And at one point, my son had called me and said that Moya had been called into the principal's office because he kept saying he needed to burn all this ivy. And so basically, my son had to explain what I do and who I am and how Moya knows about prescribed burning. And so as a 4-year-old, he already knows his connection to the land. So, as long as we continue to teach our future generations who they are and what their responsibilities are, I think we're going to keep going in a good way.
It's so, so lovely to hear all of that stuff from Elizabeth. The personal details, that heartening story about the impact of her grandson, understanding about controlled burning as a fire, sort of a fire management practice, but also the practical stuff, hearing about the fact that people are listening. They are listening to those voices from Indigenous communities that have previously been completely sidelined, worse than sidelined. But government, states are listening.
Yeah, it's beautiful to see that encapsulated in that small example of a little boy at school who's telling his friends and his teachers about destroying invasive plant species. That is a little micro example of people who've they've been through colonization, they've been through an attempted erasure of their entire ways of life and their culture, maintaining some agency in their relationship with their world. And like you said, now the national powers and essentially the colonizing powers have realized that there is value in that, not just kind of monetary value, but value for all of our futures in acknowledging and learning from these established relationships people have with their world, with our world, with the world.
I think some people at this point might raise a sceptical eyebrow and say, well, how can you scale up Indigenous practice that is, great for people living at kind of low population densities, as Indigenous cultures might have done 10,000 years ago, or even as recently as, sort of 500 years ago, right? How can you scale that up? But the data is there. It's really good. It's really good. And it's not just in California, it's also in Australia. And there's actually a much longer body of scientific evidence there that shows that Indigenous fire practice strategies work. They work. David Bowman's been working on it for years, and he's an expert, and he really does buy into. He passionately believes that this different approach to fire management is going to be key to the future. Right, he sent me, after we had our chat, David Bowman emailed me and sent me this picture of a wooden plaque he has in his garden, and it says on it "Petit feu," like little fire in French, and underneath it is like emblazoned a little subtitle that says "Affectionately tending the earthly garden with little fires," because he's like, people will need fire. Fire is part of our world. We're never going to have a planet where there are no wildfires. So we have to learn how to live with them. And the way to live with them is to employ these little fires and garden our planet like people have been gardening the planet for probably 100,000 years plus.
And having these healthier relationships with our environment and with fire as part of that isn't just good for us, it's good for the environment and all the other beings in it as well.
And so it's like bringing the humans into the mix with that is understanding how that works and doing it on a scale that doesn't devastate, that finds a balance, that is a balance that is as biodiverse as possible.
And all of these different techniques and approaches that we've been talking about in terms of our relationship with fire, if we zoom out a bit, there's the bigger picture of the changes that we're seeing on the planet, caused by another aspect of our relationship with fire, which is our carbon dioxide emissions from burning fossil fuels. And that is one of the big underlying things that we can change together, is we need to change our consumption patterns, change how we live and how we see our lifestyles of consumption to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere, reduce our emissions. Because we may not hit the most conservative of those targets, because getting collective change on a planetary scale is apparently not very easy.
We did it for CFCs.
True.
We did it for CFCs. Keep coming back to that. It is possible.
Maybe Big Fridge wasn't as powerful as Big Oil. I don't know. But we all need to, both individually and collectively, become guardians and good neighbours to our planet and the other living things on it. And that can start at home, in our communities, and build out to larger societal and international change.
Thanks for listening to Our Broken Planet. We hope you've learnt something along the way, and please don't despair. We all have an important role to play in helping to fix the problems in our world, and it starts with having conversations, like the ones in this episode. So why not share this episode with your friends and family?
Let us know what you thought about this episode and join the conversation on social media using the hashtag OurBrokenPlanet. Or check out the bonus content and resources over on nhm.ac.uk/podcast.
Next week, we'll be exploring the water towers of the world. Glaciers.
Glaciers?
Glaciers. Find out next week on Our Broken Planet. We hope you join us.